Lucy stepped up to the witness stand, holding the key to her father's freedom. With a steady voice, she revealed the truth no one expected. Her father was innocent, and the real culprit was someone close. The courtroom fell silent, shocked by her words. What happened next would change everything. But let's start from the beginning. It was a bright Monday morning when 10-year-old Lucy Harris stood before the courtroom, her tiny frame barely visible among the towering figures of lawyers, judges, and jurors. Her father, Robert Harris, stood accused of embezzling millions from his company. The case seemed airtight: forged documents, suspicious bank transfers, and a web of lies that painted Robert as a criminal. Once a proud and respected businessman, Robert now faced the ruin of his reputation and the looming threat of a long prison sentence. The murmurs of the courtroom filled the air like a swarm of bees, making Lucy's heart pound in her chest. She felt every gaze upon her, heavy and unrelenting. How could this be happening? Her father had always been the rock of their family, the man who made her feel safe, who taught her right from wrong. The idea that he could be guilty of such a betrayal seemed impossible. Her mother sat beside her, her face pale, eyes red from crying, yet silent. Lucy's own heart ached for her mother, but she was focused on something else: the truth. She knew in her soul that her father was innocent, but no one seemed to care about the truth. No one was listening to her. The prosecutor, a tall, cold man named Charles, moved confidently around the courtroom, weaving his case, his words sharp and assured. Each statement felt like a hammer, striking the nail deeper into Robert's coffin. Lucy's stomach twisted in knots. Her father's life was on the line, and she had to do something. Yet, all she could do was sit in silence, hoping, praying, that somehow the truth would break through the web of lies. This wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was the moment that could tear their family apart. That night, as the house fell silent, Lucy sat alone in her father's study, her eyes scanning the piles of receipts and papers that had once seemed so ordinary. Something inside her stirred, a nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. It wasn't like her to pry, but the weight of the accusations against her father felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit together. She had to know more. She sifted through the stacks of documents, each one more mundane than the last. But then her hand froze. Buried at the bottom of a pile of receipts was an unmarked envelope, its edges worn and yellowed with age. It didn't belong there. With trembling fingers, Lucy opened it. Inside was a single letter, written in a hurried, almost frantic script. It was from Mark Richardson, her father's old colleague. The letter hinted at something dark, something bigger than what was being told in the courtroom. It spoke of a scheme, one that Robert Harris had been unknowingly swept into, orchestrated by someone he had trusted. The words were cryptic, but the implications were clear. Robert was a pawn, not the mastermind. Lucy's mind raced. She couldn't believe what she was reading, but she couldn't ignore it either. Mark had been close to her father for years, yet now it seemed he might be involved in something far more sinister. The letter alone wasn't enough, though. She needed more. Determined, she set out to uncover the truth. She reached out to her father's old friends, people he had worked with before the accusations had ruined his name. They were reluctant to speak, but Lucy's persistence paid off. Piece by piece, they shared fragments of stories that painted a different picture of her father's involvement. A picture that didn't match the one the prosecution had crafted. It was all starting to make sense, but there was more to find. Then, in a quiet, forgotten drawer, Lucy discovered a ledger, one that had been hidden away for years. As she flipped through its pages, her heart pounded. There it was, in black and white, the name she had feared to see: Mark Richardson. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation as the trial neared its end. The air was thick with tension, and Lucy could feel it pressing down on her chest. The judge, poised at the bench, was preparing to deliver his verdict. The whispers in the room had long since faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion, and yet the inevitable weight of a guilty verdict felt like it was already hanging over her family. But Lucy's mind was clear. She knew what she had to do, and she couldn't wait any longer. Without warning, she stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor cut through the silence. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, but she didn't hesitate. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to walk to the witness stand, her small frame suddenly so exposed under the harsh courtroom lights. All eyes followed her. The prosecutor, who had been so sure of his case, turned to look at her with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. Lucy didn't care. She took a deep breath, gathered every ounce of courage she could find, and spoke. "Your Honor," she began, her voice somehow steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "I have something important to say." The room fell into complete silence. Even the judge seemed to pause, his gaze now fixed on Lucy. She could feel the weight of the room on her shoulders, but her resolve only grew stronger. She reached into her bag, her hands shaking, and pulled out the ledger she had found, the document that would change everything. Lucy held it up for everyone to see. "This is the truth. My dad didn't steal the money. Mark Richardson did. He set up the whole thing, and my dad was just a pawn in his game." The gasps that followed seemed to echo in her ears. The prosecutor, frozen for a moment, looked like he had just been struck. The judge's face twisted in confusion, his brow furrowing as he processed the words. The jury exchanged confused, uneasy glances. For the first time in weeks, a sense of hope blossomed in Lucy's chest. She had done it. She had found the truth and made it known. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it felt like they had a chance. The days that followed were a blur of relief and disbelief. Mark Richardson's arrest had come swiftly, his involvement in the scheme fully exposed. With the truth finally laid bare, all charges against Robert Harris were dropped. The courtroom that had once felt like a battleground now felt like a distant memory. The weight that had burdened the Harris family for so long was lifted in an instant. Robert, once a man on the brink of losing everything, was now a free man. His reputation was restored, and the shadow of guilt that had haunted him vanished. But for Lucy, the victory wasn't just about her father's acquittal. It was about something deeper, something she had fought for in her own quiet, brave way. At only 10 years old, Lucy had faced the overwhelming force of a flawed system and stood her ground. She had refused to let injustice define her family, and in doing so, had changed everything. Her courage rippled through the community, inspiring others to stand up for what was right, to speak the truth even when it was hard. Lucy's actions sparked conversations in every corner of the town, and people began to believe again, not just in justice, but in the power of one person's determination to make a difference. In the weeks that followed, Robert's company was fully cleared of all accusations. The business that had once been on the brink of collapse stood stronger than ever. As a way to honor the truth that had saved them, the Harris family founded the Truth Prevails Foundation. The organization's mission was simple: to help those who had been wrongfully accused and ensure that the truth always found its way to the surface. One evening, as Lucy and her father stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The world had changed for them, and the weight of the past had been lifted. Lucy, gazing at the sky, realized that sometimes the biggest heroes come in the smallest packages. In that moment, she understood that no matter how small or young a person might be, they could still change the world, if they were brave enough to stand up for what was right.